The Americans weren't enemies. They were our kinsmen. They were the king's deluded subjects. Foolish, no doubt, wicked possibly, but not foreigners, not enemies. They were really Englishmen. The American situation was not a war. But the worse the situation got in America, the greater was the risk that Britain's real hereditary enemies, France above all, but also Spain, would exploit the trouble, the difficulties that Britain had got into in the hope of getting revenge for their defeats in the previous war, in the 7 Years' War, when they had been so disastrously defeated.
When John Burgoyne surrendered his army at Saratoga, America at last looked like a credible force. 24-year-old Louis XVI and his ministers at Versailles decided that the time had come for France to formally enter the war. On February 6, 1778, Louis signed a treaty of alliance, militarily binding France to the American cause for the duration of America's War of Independence.
What happened in America had become a sideshow, because however troublesome, difficult, intractable the colonial problem was, it remained essentially a domestic problem and a colonial problem. The Americans did not pose a threat to Britain, not a direct threat. There was no more risk of the Americans invading Britain than there was of the Martians invading Britain. The risk of France invading was real, serious, and immediate.
The road to this dramatic change in the nature and focus of the war was paved with intrigue. And one of the principal architects of the road was America's brilliant elder statesman, Benjamin Franklin. Since November of 1776, he had resided just outside Paris on the road to Versailles, watching and waiting for his opportunities as a congressionally appointed ambassador from the newly independent League of States.
Franklin was like a superstar in France. He was idolized. They had his picture everywhere. He said, "My phiz is as well known as the man on the moon." They had him on mantelpieces, on snuff box, on rings, in miniatures, everywhere. As John Adams bitterly related it in his diary, everybody idolized them, from the ministers down to the scullion in her kitchen, he said. They all thought he was going to bring back a golden age. America, of course, in itself was a dream for the French, the American dream, which in those days had nothing to do with buying cars or building a house in the suburbs. The American dream was one of liberty and justice.
'Tis a common observation here that our cause is the cause of all mankind, and that we are fighting for their liberty in defending our own. Benjamin Franklin, 1777.
Franklin understood his role and played it flawlessly. Since his public image was that of the frontier philosopher, he always wore simple clothes, a coonskin cap, and the bifocals of his own invention. As one of the world's most respected scientists, he entertained the intelligentsia of France. The great novelist Victor Hugo made this sketch of Franklin's residence in Passy. Queen Marie Antoinette dubbed him l'ambassadeur électrique. To young King Louis, the 70-year-old was deferential.
He studied the king, he got on his good side, and he remained forever on his good side and on the good side of the foreign minister. He did not antagonize them in any way.
Even so, his immense popularity as a folk hero was enough to irritate the king.
Louis XVI became so angered at this that he presented to a member of his court a chamber pot with Franklin's image on the inside as a kind of jibe at the whole Franklin mania that was going on at the time.
But long before the Treaty of Alliance, Franklin had been working behind the scenes, securing money and supplies for the American cause. One of his associates was a confidant of the king, Pierre-Augustin Caron Beaumarchais, the author of The Barber of Seville. As early as 1776, Beaumarchais was considering France's long-range goals.
The famous quarrel between America and England, which will soon divide the world, imposes on each power the necessity of examining closely to see how the coming of this separation will influence it for good or ill. Beaumarchais to Louis XVI, 1776.
Early in the war, with the secret blessings of the French government, Beaumarchais set up a shadowy trading firm known as Rodriguez, Hortelais and Company to ship arms and supplies to the Americans.
During the years 1776 and 1777, Rodriguez, Hortelais and Company provided about a dozen large shiploads of uniforms, rifles, gunpowder, and other military supplies, which were extremely valuable to the Continental Army.
The gunpowder, always in short supply and so crucial to the Americans, was the product of the greatest chemist in the world, Antoine Lavoisier. Benjamin Franklin, l'ambassadeur électrique, had helped his scientist friend fit the French government's explosives arsenal with his invention, lightning rods, to prevent catastrophic detonations. Through Rodriguez, Hortelais and Company, Lavoisier could return the favor.
Franklin's secret as a diplomat was his patience, his waiting for people to do things that he wanted them to do without exerting premature pressure on them. What he was waiting for, although he didn't fully realize it at the time, was for France to finish supplying its dockyards and rebuilding its navy so it would be able to fight a war with Britain. Once that was accomplished, France came to Franklin and his colleagues and negotiated the Treaty of Alliance.
Franklin and fellow ambassadors Silas Deane and Arthur Lee were quick to seize the opportunity they had cultivated for so long.
Franklin was at last able to swing an alliance, a military and political alliance with France. He probably was the greatest diplomat in our history because this was no easy task, winning that French alliance.
The alliance quickly bore fruit. In April of 1778, the Comte d'Estaing sailed towards America with a fleet of 17 ships, carrying 4,500 troops. Franklin stayed on in Passy until 1785, 2 years after he successfully negotiated another treaty, the one that ended the war.
Franklin's mission in France was as vague as any mission could be. He had been told by Congress he should procure whatever help he could, preferably money, of course, eventually ships. An alliance would be wonderful. Franklin succeeded beyond all hope in his mission. Everything that he had been asked to do was done. He got the money. He bled France white. I think if poor King Louis was eventually sent to the guillotine, it was because he had destabilized the French treasury to such a point by helping this country conquer its independence that, in a way, I think Franklin bears a little blame for the death of the unfortunate King Louis.